She thumps a cane and drinks champagne. She's formidable and judgmental, but we can guarantee that she's a quintessential Lady D, who recognizes great potential. What would Danbury do?
Welcome to What Would Danbury Do, your guide to Julia Quinn's Bridgerton series from A to V. We're Bridgerton adjacent this season as we spend time with the Smythe-Smiths, a family that definitely plays to their own tune. There are cameos from our favourite chestnut-haired siblings, but also a whole new family for heterosexual shenanigans. Join us, won't you, for an episode of spontaneous kisses, arithmetic lessons, and evil unicorns. Don't forget you can find us on Facebook and Twitter as @BridgertonPod and Instagram as @WWDDPod. We'd love for you to tweet us using the hashtag WWDDPod.
Hi, I'm Laura Von Holt from the Mermaid Podcast, part of the Frolic Podcast Network. The Mermaid Podcast is, you guessed it, all about mermaids. I cover everything from mermaid legend and history to mermaids in pop culture, movies, and TV. My guests include mermaid experts, mermaid historians, mermaid authors, mermaid charities, mermaid tale makers, and even professional mermaids. Yes, being a mermaid is a real job. So whether you have legs or fins, are a mermaid queen or a mermaid at heart, the Mermaid Podcast has something for you. You can find us at mermaidpodcast.com and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Hi, my name is Kate.
Hi, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Adele.
And today we're getting our governess on with A Night Like This, written by Julia Quinn and published in 2012 by Avon Books. The dedication to Paul reads, and also for Paul, even though I still don't understand why someone might need 7 sleeping bags.
It's like a real passive-aggressive dedication this time.
It also feels like, is this the place?
Is this... Did my mum write this to my dad?
Are we getting in the middle of a marital spat right now?
Is Julia still mad about the he has to die thing?
I mean, I think that she might be carrying some
resentment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, that's not the point.
No, it's not the point. Okay, so the point is, in the first book of the series, Just Like Heaven, Daniel Smythe-Smith, the Earl of Winstead, returns home from exile at the end of the story, just in time for that year's musicale. This book picks up just at that moment when Daniel meets Anne Winter, pianist and governess for Daniel's young cousins. Is it the relief of return? Is it the music? Is it sudden and inexplicable insta-love? Who knows? But it leads to a kiss and then a whole heap of complications, including an exile, another exile, the Isle of Man, class discrepancies, attempted murder, and several works of art from a budding playwright. The end.
It was sudden and inexplicable insta-love, yes.
Yeah, okay, yes. It really was. Are we just going to get right into this? Because I feel like last episode we ran into issues of finding enough to talk about because we all liked the book so much.
I mean, we're not used to that.
And now I'm like, oh God, I'm going to have so much to talk about in this book because
Are we coming right off the bat to find out that you guys did not like this book?
It was okay.
It makes sense why I remember nothing of this book because there is really very little to remember.
But everything's happening all the time.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's incredibly plot heavy because the emotional plot isn't there. She has to keep throwing cut reins and, I don't know, people with knives and stuff showing up because...
And cousins.
Yeah, because there's no, there's no relationship story, really.
And she's also given them kind of the same backstory, which is weird.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, of like injured somebody have to go on the run, hide your identity just in case you get found.
Like, it's...
Yeah, they are the same person.
There's even the same, like, someone coming after them with murdery intentions.
But which murdery person?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of murdery people.
The one that got slashed in the face or the one that got shot in the knee? The leg. Like, I feel like there was more characterization for Daniel in the last bit of the first book than there was in this entire novel. Like, I like the Daniel in those last scenes when he's, fighting with Marcus. And then it's like, he's just fallen in love with Anne, who's really giving him very little except being pretty. And it's all just very distracting, but not something you're connecting to on an emotional level at all.
Now I'm starting to understand, because when you were saying, like, nothing happens, I'm like, but everything is happening. So much is happening. There's never not anything happening. But what you mean, what you actually mean is emotionally nothing is happening.
Emotionally nothing is happening. There's no emotional arc to this story, really. All of the plot is external and none of it is internal, which is really unusual for a romance novel. Because generally speaking, when it comes to romance, like, those are very internal stories. That's a lot of, like, what's going on under the surface, as opposed to, like, horses running away and people getting stabbed and blood and whatever. Like, it's a very, very externally plot heavy novel, this one.
And then it's like, you know what? We need to chuck in a disapproving relative as well. I'm like, everything is thrown in here. It is like Big Brother, like, let's throw everything. Well,
and I think that's the thing. I mean, Julia Quinn had to keep throwing external things at them because there wasn't enough going on in the relationship arc to actually warrant any kind of quiet period, like any kind of down period. Like, you had it's I don't know, it's almost like Speed. Like, this is like the romance novel equivalent of Speed, in that they have a shitload of things happen and then they're in love at the end, and Sandra Bullock is all like, relationships that begin in stress don't last, and Keanu's like, well, base it on sex instead. And I'm like, that worked in the film. I don't know that it worked in the novel.
I was about to feel really called out because I love Speed
right?
so much.
I know. I adore Speed.
But it also, it very much proves its own point, because the sequel has them broken up.
Mm. All right, let's talk about the plot a little bit, because I have so much I want to say, particularly about insta-love.
Yeah, can we slow this down and walk through it? And maybe because Kate has the strongest feelings.
We need to get internal on this, even though the novel did not. We start off with Anne, who's pulled up on stage because Sarah is, I'm so sick. I can't possibly. And so Anne is, like, thrust onto the piano at the musicale. And obviously has, some ability to play the piano, but whatever. It's never going to be a great concert. And then she stumbles off and goes to find a quiet place to recover, and meets Daniel, who, like, is like, hey, nice. And then they kiss. And then she's all like, I can't do this. And he's like, I should probably go and talk to my family or whatever. And then off they go. And then he finds out that she's the governess to his cousins. And he's all like, totally gonna go and call on my very young cousins who don't even remember who I am, but I should be reconnecting with family. And, like, hangs out at his cousin's house for a long time. And then, like, just keeps artificially creating situations where he is throwing opportunities at Anne to spend time with him, even though she's like, this is not okay. And his family is like, and also, yeah, he's the only one in the entire situation who's like, why shouldn't I be spending a lot of time with this governess who's essentially an employee of my family and has so very little power in this situation? I don't see why this would be a problem at all. Also, she's really pretty. Have I mentioned that she's really pretty? She's really pretty.
He's a Benedict.
Look, I'm just saying. There is a lot of entitlement to our friend Daniel here. And, like, being in his head obviously means that that's mitigated because you're able to see that he's doing it from, like, with no malice or intent. And that when, you know, when the power differential is pointed out, he is genuinely, like, taken aback about the potential consequences. But at the same time, like, his actions are very much somebody who has never had to think about anything in his whole life, which is weird given that he's just been away dealing with the consequences of his actions for some time. So you would think that he would have this idea of action and consequence as, you know, at least as a concept. Like, you think that he would have a grasp of the concept, but he doesn't seem to have the grasp of the concept for other people and not, you know, that particular situation. But I think Julia Quinn is still playing to her strengths in that she's created this whole new family, which allows for a lot of secondary characters and a lot of those secondary relationships and a lot of, like, the quirks that come out in family life. She's very, very good at capturing that dynamic. And I think that's the thing that will carry you through the story, even though the relationship between Daniel and Anne is incredibly superficial.
Like, when you're learning to write, you're always told to do, like, a character profile or the backstory and the motivations of a character. And the thing is, with both of them, it's so unclear that she's done that work. Like, what did Daniel do for the 3 years he was away other than run? He had to have done things and learnt things or engaged with things. And the same for Anne. And then what do they want? Like, why did he came back because he could, but what was the aim other than just to be back with his family? Like, what are the motivations of these people? Like, they're just so unrealized, I think. So why would you want them together when you don't really know who they are?
I think that's a really good point, actually, because they don't change from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. There isn't a lot of growth or change from either of the characters. They're very much the same people that they were at the beginning of the book as they are at the end, just with fewer external forces on them.
I don't think I care.
Right, okay.
I don't think I care that they don't grow all that much. And I don't know. I'm really starting to wonder why. I know that I've read this book before. I had to have because it was on my bookshelf and, like, clearly I bought it at the time of publication. I could not have told you what this book was about before we started. Like, a week ago, I would not have been even able to tell you that it was going to be about the governess, like, that it would be about Anne. And then reading it, I kept having this sort of weird moment, like weird sort of thought process of, I want to get to Iris's book because I'm more interested. But also everything about this is like it's almost like a fanfic of Lisa Kleypas's Married by Morning. I don't know if either of you guys have read it, but that's like, I love that book and have read it a lot. And it hits a lot of the same beats of the hero is like a young paternal figure in the family who has been away for a few years while the governess has like become established in the family. And then he comes home and they sort of clash, but there's chemistry. And she has a secret like past she's on the run from, and he is aware of the fact that there's clearly something a bit off about her, but it's not stopping him from wanting to kiss her. And like all of that is kind of happening in this, but it's slightly differently. And what I now am thinking is like, does Married by Morning work better because there is several books of them clashing and getting to know each other before their actual book? Or like, do I just not care? do I just am I just here for this specific trope regardless?
I think you've made a good point in, like, the first book really does a great job of setting up Hugh and Sarah and Iris and but it doesn't really set up Anne, because she comes in at the last minute to save everything, and she's not really a focus, and Daniel comes in at the end. So they're kind of coming in cold.
Yeah, we could have shifted this book later in the series. I know it wouldn't actually work because
Hugh needed to resolve what's resolved in book 1 and 2 to get to 3, yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of senses, it doesn't make sense to shift this particular story back to, like, further in the queue of the quartet. But it probably would have been better if it had been, or if, like, we knew Anne earlier in Just Like Heaven.
I feel like Julie Quinn has maybe set herself up for a little bit of a, I'm not going to say a fall, like a little bit of just a slightly less engaging novel by having Daniel sort of like in the relief and joy of his return kiss a stranger and then try and build a romance novel around that. Like, it could just be that he was just super relieved and really joyful, and here was this woman, and he had this outpouring of emotion and kissed her. And then, like, that was the end of it. But trying to build a romance novel around it it left it without a really solid ground to build on.
It's not until a certain point that you realise he has only been wanting to sleep with her. It's not necessarily that he was thinking she was endgame. Like, he felt a connection to her, and it's only a certain point when he realizes he's in love with her and he wants to spend the rest of his life with her. But, like, what the fuck was he doing before then? He was doing a Benedict.
She was hot. You know, he couldn't help himself. That's right. See, and this is the thing I have, because this is a trope that you get a lot. There's two things that are happening here. First is there's the insta love, and then secondly there's the like incredibly beautiful protagonist. And there's two things that bother me, each one to each of that particular tropes. And I'm going to talk about the beautiful protagonist issue. And for me, it really hit home because at one point, Daniel is talking about Anne, and he says something like, you know, yes, I can tell that she's gorgeous and beautiful, and look at how beautiful she is, but it wasn't just her beauty, it was her soul. And it plays into a genuine psychological phenomenon of, if somebody is attractive on the outside, you automatically assume that they're attractive on the inside. And the vice versa. Vice versa is also very true. And it you know, there's been studies on it as a genuine phenomenon that people who are more conventionally attractive are perceived to be better people. And there was a little bit of that going on in this book because Anne is so preternaturally beautiful. And yeah, I mean, she's a good governess, but they don't really know anything about her. But Daniel from the get-go assumes that because he can see her external appearance, he also knows her internally as well. Like, there's a lot of, I'm seeing past her beauty into, the person that she actually is. And that doesn't really actually happen.
You don't think that by observing her maths lesson of, like, measuring out their paces in the street isn't him finding out that she's a beautiful soul as well?
Look, I'm not, as a parent, I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. I might try that one. But, like, as a person looking to build a lifelong relationship, I'm like, maybe I need to know more than the cleverness of her math lessons.
That wasn't enough for you? I'm shocked.
Maybe my standards are just too high, Rudy, and that's the problem.
Can I, look, actually, sorry, I do want to get to your second point without, like, but I also Remind me to come back to the idea of your experience homeschooling over the past 12 years of lockdown and appetites for stories about a governess. Because I am sure that, like, that hits different now.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm totally...
On one hand, there's like, are you reading yourself as the governess because you are taking on that like role of home teacher? Or are you actually like remembering that you are the mother of these children and fuck, wouldn't you just love a governess?
Right.
Like...
It's interesting,
wouldn't you just love a person to just like live in your home and do that? So you could have a goddamn break.
I don't think we've ever talked about this before. I am so not a self-insert reader, like on any level. I think when I'm reading a book, it's more for me like I'm reading about two close friends in whose relationship I'm emotionally invested but not involved.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I don't know if I am or not. There's some really interesting studies about like whether people are doing self-insert as the hero or the heroine, or like, because there's some, or whether it's like, God, I'm going to butcher this and like, I don't fucking care. Whether there's like a Jungian kind of experience of like the process is to have like the two, assuming it's a romance novel with two characters, the two love interests uniting is what you are kind of reading for, because that's different elements of your own self kind of like finding harmony. That's one of my favorites, but it has been years since I read that paper, and it was very much like a it's got a lot of problems. Let's just leave it at that.
Guess me. Am I self-insert or not?
No, I don't think you are, actually.
Oh, we're guessing. Sorry, I didn't listen to you at all. Yeah, I can't imagine that you self-insert.
I'm not a self-insert at all. I don't even do mental pictures. Self-insert is a step too far.
Do you reckon that's tied to it? Because none of us are particularly, like, vivid in terms of the, mental picture.
Yeah.
But I also... You know how a lot of people conflate the actor with the character? Like, that's never a thing for me. Ever. And I also don't stan. Like, I'll use the word stan, but I don't go, like, excessively into something. So I always have an aspect of separateness, I guess.
Okay, well, I can't lay claim to that, because I got an email that suggested that I might be able to do something that involved somebody that I'm a massive fan of, and like I nearly cried. So took me 3 days to reply to the fucking email. Because I was like, I don't even know how to tell you how, like, and then I've had no reply since. It's fine. I'm not having an existential crisis at all.
Honestly, your existential crisis is more interesting than Daniel.
Sorry, but we do have to go back to them. So, Kate, I am going to come back to the idea of the governess and everything, but before we do, you had a second point.
Well, and I think this is less about, the psychology of beauty and, internal and external beauty, and just more about genuinely insta love is not a trope that has ever worked for me as a reader. And I think it's because I genuinely really enjoy internal conflict. And I really like being really deep inside characters' heads and watching that character growth. It's why, and this is a controversial take, it's why I think I could appreciate Normal People by Sally Rooney, but it didn't speak to me the way that it spoke to a few other people in my life who loved that book. And it was because I was deep in these people's perspective, and all they were doing was making the same mistake over and over again. And as a reader, I just found that so frustrating that I was turned off and turned away from them because they were just so irritating. And it's part of the reason why I think I like romance novels so much, because there's so much emphasis on the growth of the character from beginning to end. And this idea of becoming, your best self so that you can give your best in a relationship. That's something that I really enjoy reading about, and that kind of self-growth is something that I'm quite drawn to when it comes to fictional characters. And I'm pretty sure a therapist could have a lot of stuff to say about that. But and which is why I think for Insta Love, for me, I'm like I'm too practical and too cynical to believe in it. I'm like, okay, yes, I can see why you might feel a connection or like a spark or like interest or attraction, but like none of those things equal love. Like love is what happens after that calms down a little bit. Love is what happens when things aren't sparkly. I want to see that the building blocks beneath it so that I believe that the foundation is solid. With Insta Love, a lot of times it requires the skipping of steps that mean that foundation isn't necessarily built up the way that it is in other tropes within romance novels. And I think for me in this story in particular, because there was such a power discrepancy in it from the get-go, that foundation feels even more shaky to me, because, Daniel had so much more power and Anne didn't even have a family. And even if she reconciles with her family after they exile her, they don't have any power in this, in the social sphere that the Smythe-Smiths move in. And for Daniel to be like, oh, I instantly want to know everything about you, and you have captivated me, body and soul. And I'm like, yeah, but what happens if you change your mind just as fast? Like, what happens when you're no longer captivated, or I don't know, she snores or something, and you're like, oh, well, actually, you snoring is not captivating. And what happens when she, ages out of conventional beauty and becomes just a striking older woman? Is he still going to be incredibly captivated, or is, how much of his captivation is tied to the surreality of her amazing good looks? So, yeah.
So I think, how like last time I was talking about, I kind of like that whiff of death in a romance novel because it ups the stakes, and I think it also, in a very real way, it is how Insta Love romance novels test the love, like make them realize that they do actually like want and need each other beyond the superficial, and can survive as a relationship. Like it can survive these like big emotional tests. And I understand why there's a pushback against that is happening, and like that particular style of narrative. And I think, yeah, like maybe I've just been, I don't know, indoctrinated. But like when it's handled by somebody who has like a certain level of skill, it may not actually become like a fave. But I do think that that's why those bleak moments are way more prevalent in an Insta Love story than anywhere else.
See, I'm just cynical because I think he married her for her face and she married him for his family. So,
I mean, there are worse things to base a relationship on, really.
The other thing I get stuck on, and this is the kind of shit that I get stuck on that does not mean anything. If she was this gloriously beautiful, why didn't the family aspire to more than marry her into that, like, the powerful family in the immediate area.
You got to remember that in order to actually, like, get anywhere, like, even, like, one town over is a pretty, like, massive amount of effort and often money as well. So, yeah, like, I don't think they, like, had the resources to aspire to more than that one family.
It's the villain of which she boinked her for her first time. And then, like, he F's her over and she slashes his face. And then he's basically become certifiably insane. It felt like a leap.
Because he's ugly now.
Yes.
Which speaks to Kate's point.
It just felt like everything is paper thin in this novel. Like, it's, except for the 26 act play.
Give Harriet writing credit.
I mean, they didn't seem that concerned about who he's currently married to, and I'm like, that woman is going through some shit. Like,
Yeah, and what's the implication that he wasn't able to get it up anymore?
Because he has a cut on his cheek.
Because he's been stabbed. Yeah, because he had, and like, okay, a scar. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that could be said from a disability rep point of view in this book.
Which, look, it's a theme.
Yikes. I need to focus on something I like. Like, it's very quippy. The cousin stuff is an extension of what we saw with the different set of cousins in the first book. Like, there's no mincing around with their words. They go straight for the throat, which I quite enjoy about it. It's I mean, I guess that's the great thing of her being a governess, is we get more time with more of the Smythe-Smiths adjacent. The Plainworths? Is that how you say it? Plainsworths. Yeah.
Plainsworth? Generally, I'm not somebody who enjoys a lot of children in romance novels, but I enjoyed the cousins very much.
Well, speaking of the cousins, let's go back to Kate.
Whether the pain of my current situation has led me to unfairly judge this book.
Well, whether it changes how you feel about governesses. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I hadn't thought of it. I know that you love a governess. I tend to be super aware of power differentials in romance novels, and for me, one of the things that will turn me off a book or make it so that I'm really I didn't enjoy it, or I come away with bad feelings, is if I don't feel like that power differential has been addressed. And I don't mean in like the old school guardian ward way where, you know, the fact that he loves her means she has all the power over him, and thus there is no longer a power differential. Like, that is not a thing that I necessarily believe in. So I tend to be a little bit more wary, I think, of governess romances because there's that inbuilt power differential, and because, and this is addressed a couple of times throughout the course of the book. You know, governesses have a really weird space in society in that they have to be more respectable than anybody else. So they're not a servant. They're not the family. They very rarely marry because they don't sort of have anybody within that same space. And it's just a weird way of living. So I don't know that I thought about it in the context of having to be teaching myself at the moment. And the one thing I will say about that is that I have an arts degree, and I mean, arts degrees don't necessarily lead to a well laid out career path. So of course I considered teaching. And eventually made the decision that that was not going to be something that suited me temperamentally. And every day I am reminded that that was a very good decision for me. Like, it is thoroughly cemented that I would have been a terrible teacher. And I'm so grateful to the people who do have a much better temperament and significantly more patience than I do, because I have no patience. I am the least patient person I know, and trying to talk a 5-year-old through like why gold coins are worth more than silver coins is an ongoing trauma in my life, and I'm hoping it's not a trauma in her life too, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out in therapy in like 10 years time.
Okay. Yeah.
So look, I think I'm a pretty experienced enough reader to have not necessarily brought my experience into the book. Although this was very much a book that just happened to rub up against things that I'm hyper aware of when it comes to romance novels, tropes that I find less engaging. And just generally speaking, like, not as somebody who, you know, has engaged with the romance genre critically and professionally for many years, but also just as a reader, things that I naturally prefer or don't prefer. It just happens that this book is just an absolute maelstrom of things that Kate doesn't accept or Kate's going to be able to walk through. So, yeah.
I guess because it really wasn't until this afternoon that I was thinking about the fact that, like, you are in a position of having to teach young children in your home, and that, like, and I know that they are your actual kids, so obviously your feelings about them is different, but like, but it's this like that role of governess is a strange one in that it's you're part of the family. You also have an actual job to do and achieve, and a lot of it hinges on the relationship that you have with the children you're working with. And I think that there is, I wouldn't be surprised if we see people having a different relationship to stories, like to romance novels about governesses in the next few years. Because authors are having to homeschool their kids, and because readers are homeschooling their kids.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if there's sort of either people stop writing about governesses and teachers, or whether they start writing more about governesses and teachers, and the way that
and whether there's a different flavor to the ones that come out. Because, you know, you really could be looking at it as, like, people who are seeing themselves in the role of the governess, or people who are seeing wish fulfillment in having a governess. Yeah. Yeah, I do know. It's funny because every now and again my husband will sort of float the idea of, it's not even floating the idea, it's more just hey, do you know that au pairs exist? Have you ever thought about getting an au pair? And I'll be like, what? And you were like, I've lived in Australia for the last few years, so fuck oath, I know that au pairs are a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
They can bring the country to their knees. Sorry.
Just on the au pair governess thing, did anyone think that Anne seemed to have a lot of time off?
Yeah, see, like, this is part of it, where you're like, you start to realize, like, think about the realities of what it would be like. You are more familiar with what it actually means to look after children at home in a teaching capacity.
Yeah, well, and this sort of goes back to, this goes sort of back to my au pair comment, which is mainly that I don't want somebody else living in my space all the time. I feel like that would be really weird. And why I I like a governess doesn't necessarily appeal to me because living in my situation at the moment, like there would be another person in my space all the time. And I just, yeah, maybe if I had an enormous mansion, I'd feel differently. I mean, I think in many ways, this is a romance novel depiction of a governess, right? And I mean, there are certain references to Anne's past roles where she's had to deal with attempted sexual assault and discrimination and everything because of her precarious place in the family. But this is a romance novel governess in this sense. So she has a very nice family who are all very kind to her and also very willing to accept her move from governess to countess, and don't seem to blink an eye at that. And they, you know, she's treated very well and gets extra time off. And yeah, like, I don't think that this is necessarily a historically accurate depiction of what being a governess was like at the time. So yeah, so I just sort of, those things I never really bounce against, because I'm like, well, of course, because this is a romance novel. So of course, unless it's a plot element, of course she doesn't have any horrible things to go through from the family that she's governessing for.
Is there anything else that we need to talk about in terms of the book broadly?
Do we want to talk about all the various murder attempts?
Do you want to talk about them now, or do you want to talk about them as a What the Featherington?
Oh yeah, let's talk about them as a What the Featherington.
Does anybody have any What the Featheringtons they'd like to share?
I feel like I've talked a lot. Adele, do you have a What the Featherington?
There's this point in chapter 11 when Dan goes, sorry, Daniel. They almost look violet, his head tilted to the tiniest bit to the side, but they don't. They're still blue. Anne smiled and looked away. She'd always been proud of her eyes. It was the one vanity she still allowed herself. From far away, they look brown, she said. Like, what the fuck?
Do you know what? I think that it's quite funny because at the start of this book, Anne is trying to figure out what colour Daniel's eyes are and whether they are going to be violet like his sister's, and then sort of discovers a few pages later that they're just a very, very pale blue. And so, like, and now he also is. We came so close, guys. We came so close to having double violet eyes. No Titian hair in sight, but we could have had double violet.
Wow. That would be that's the unicorn in romance novels right there.
Yeah. I used to think that the unicorn was a hero with violet eyes, which I do actually still really love when that happens because it's super rare. But double violet would have been like chef's kiss.
Mm. Look, I just want to talk about the various ways that attempted murder happened in this book. So we had the footpads. Was it ever actually determined whether that was actually attempted murder or not?
I don't think it was confirmed.
Okay, so what did we have? So Hugh gets set on by footpads, but something happened before that.
Do you mean Daniel? Daniel gets set on.
Yeah, I said Hugh.
Hugh.
It's because I'm looking forward to Hugh's book.
Aren't we all?
Much like Adele, I was more invested in Hugh from like the 2 times that he appeared on page than I was in anything that was happening with Daniel and Anne.
It's just so much more interesting.
It's true. And by the way, are they going to be called Dan and Anne now? Because that's a lot. I just thought that the various ways that they attempted to murder off the characters were, they were inventive. They were fun. There was a lot of them.
Because it's insta-love, so you need that whiff of death. And
yeah, this wasn't a whiff, though. This was like...
I know. Well,
this
yeah.
like a stink bomb of death.
The skunk just kept turning up and poof.
Right.
Oh, someone raised that lead.
That's exactly what happened.
Oh, yeah.
Do I have one?
Can we also talk about the fact that the guy got a scar and his dick didn't work anymore? Like, seriously?
I feel like that's probably the biggest What the Featherington
Yeah.
going in terms of this book. Like, I understood the justification. Like, I understood the thought process, but I also was like, I'm doing a lot of work here to get, like, to accept this. I feel like it's a really boring to have impotence be like
Yes.
a signifier of evil. And maybe this is also... So, look, what you guys don't know is that for the past couple of weeks, I have been watching a truly disgusting amount of Criminal Minds. And, like, 8 out of 10 unsubs, because that's what we call them in Criminal Minds.
Right.
8 out of 10 unsubs have, like, are impotent. And it is just, like, I know that that's probably a thing, but I also am like, just, can we just try and expand? I don't know. Be more creative.
Well, yeah, and I think my biggest What the Featherington, apart from like the various like kind of humorous ones, are the fact that like just the leaning that Quinn did on disability and visible difference and health problems and anything that doesn't mean that you are a gorgeous specimen of a person is an indication of evil and bad thoughts and something wrong on the inside. Like it's tired. I'm tired of this. We should be, I mean, it was written in 2012, but like in 2012 we should have still been over this, that, you know, that ugliness on the outside is ugliness on the inside, particularly because she leaned so heavily on the pretty on the outside means pretty on the inside. Like, it would have been more interesting to me if she'd reversed that a little bit.
Oh, look, I'm almost always there for the reversal. But I think also, like, just... There are people that have wronged me and I just moved on with my life. Like, granted, I've never had anybody, like, cut my face with a knife. But, like, I think when you have more power and privilege and you end up getting married to the person you wanted to marry anyway, like, I don't know, just, like, you can let her go. Like, it, like, the, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I'm just, like, I'm very, after Adele said that they have the same backstory, it has potentially changed my feelings about the book.
Like, yeah.
Because it's really hard to not think about that now.
It's true. They do have exactly the same backstory, and their names rhyme, and those two facts delight me in a way that the rest of the book does not.
Yeah, I think it has made it more goofy to me than it was previously, and, like, that's fine, but it also yeah, I don't know. Just it's changed my relationship to the book now. Anyway, now it's time for
What would Danbury do?
This is where we imagine that a character from another book has written to our favourite terrifying termagant to ask for advice. So today we have a letter from Augustus from Longshot by Kennedy Ryan.
Dear Lady Danbury, can you fall in love at first sight? I don't know, but I definitely think I found the one, and all it took was an evening's conversation. Problem is, she's already in a serious relationship, and while I know the guy is an absolute dick, I also trust her to make her own choices. But I can't stop thinking about her, obsessing about her, knowing that we will be good together. Is it worth living in this kind of hopeful agony, or should I just cut my losses and find someone else? Helpful hints for how to do that also appreciated. What would Danbury do?
It's always better for the person in the relationship to realize it's not working. While I'm always down for some sabotage in a fictional sense, in real life that doesn't really play out very well.
No, without fail, you say something and then they get back together again, and then like your friendship is over because they can't ever get over all the shit you said when they were like thinking about leaving that relationship.
Sometimes without even wanting to date the person. Sometimes it's just your friend has bad taste. And you just bite your tongue and don't agree to be the third housemate in their house.
Hypothetically speaking.
Don't do it. It's a bad idea. You won't enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to be hopeful, but you've got to live your life.
All right, Augustus. First, some Lady Danbury advice. What would Danbury do? She would find a sassy old lady to do some straight talking and point out to your crush that the guy that she's with is trash. What would Rudy do? Rudy strongly encourages you to do something that she would never do herself, and actually just like tell the person how you feel and leave it in their hands. Trust them to make their choice. Make it clear that their answer will not. If the answer is no, it won't hurt your friendship. Like, and that you will still be friends, but like you kind of can't expect somebody to work with only half, like to make the choice you want them to make when you've only given them half the information. So, I don't know, like I guess like it kind of comes down to, do you find yourself, do you have a grumpy old aunt in your life? If not, you kind of have to like step up. It kind of needs to be clear that if she says no to you, you are still going to be in her life, and that your friendship is not kind of hinging on whether or not you will get sex out of it. That is not a nice feeling to be on the other end of that and realize the only interest somebody had in you was sexual. But same way, like it's kind of like to find out after years, as opposed to like, yeah, it just kind of, it's a tricky one all around. But Kate, why did you want to tell us about that book?
Well, first of all, I really want to put out there that this book comes with several content warnings. It was a very good book, and I don't have any regrets about reading it at all, but it does delve into a pretty abusive relationship, and a lot of what happens within that abusive relationship, including sexual assault, happens on the page. So do be aware going into that, if you do choose to read it, that it's quite dark, and it does have characters going through quite a bit. But it's a romance novel, and you know, the ending is really good, and particularly the way that the characters overcome and learn to live with, you know, what's happened in their lives and are able to move forward, and it's really well done. I originally went looking for what would Danbury do? I originally went looking for romances that had teachers in them. I was trying to lean into the governess aspect of it, but I kept coming. This is a book I read a long time ago, and then I reread it for this particular podcast. I kept coming back to it because I don't like insta love. I thought I'd find a book where there was that instant connection that I actually liked, that I actually thought really worked. And so I chose this book because there is an instant connection between the characters, and the characters do sort of develop quite a connection and I would say quite deep attraction and potentially stronger feelings than that for each other, even though they don't meet very often through the first part of the book. But it felt, for me as a reader, this felt more in line with I suppose what I could believe emotionally than a lot of other insta love or insta connection kind of books do. So I think that Kennedy Ryan, the author, manages that, to balance that, you know, I feel a deep connection with you. And plus, I mean, the characters spend about 4 hours in conversation when they first meet. You know, I'm really drawn to you, while still giving them an opportunity to learn about each other and to grow as people and to see that they still fit together, even past that sort of first attraction, first impressions, I guess. So yeah, so that's why I chose this one.
That's all for this episode of What Would Danbury Do? We're back in a fortnight with the sum of all kisses. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter as @BridgertonPod and Instagram as @WWDDPod, or send us an email at bridgertonpod@gmail.com. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded land of the Gadigal, Wurundjeri and Burrung people, and edited by audio producer Rudy Bremer on Gadigal country. Thanks for listening, and remember, WWDD.
What Would Danbury Do is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts.